The pain came out of nowhere, jolting me awake as it seared through my left forearm. I sat up abruptly. A summons at this hour? No, this was different. It was an alarm. Someone had called for the Dark Lord. I flew out of bed and scrambled into my robes. No one would be foolish enough to call our master for some trivial matter. No, it could only mean one thing. Potter had been sighted, perhaps even caught. And after the Dark Lord's warning, he was probably right here in the castle. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. I had known Potter would come. But not yet. Not like this. There was no time to prepare, no chance to move the pieces into place. The battle had begun, and I had no control over the board. Did the Carrows have him? If they did, it was over. But if this was a false alarm, then the cost of their failure would be high. For all of us. Voldemort was not patient, and he did not forgive. But perhaps there was still a chance to get to him before anyone else did. I adjusted my robes and left the office like a man in control, not a man whose world was hanging by a thread. This was the moment I had spent my life working towards, and I would not fail. Hogwarts was silent at this early hour as I silently marched through the corridors, listening for any indication of where he could be. If Potter had been caught, the castle would surely be in uproar. He'd be in chains and paraded through the halls like a prize. But it wasn't. That told me that either they'd been mistaken or something had gone wrong. That was the thought that unsettled me most. The Carrows were not the brightest amongst the Dark Lord's ranks. They were impulsive, but they weren't fools. If one of them had sounded the alarm, they must have believed they had Potter. And yet there was no fight, no sound of pursuit. Had Potter escaped, or had someone intervened? That gave me a shred of hope. I had one last duty, and I knew I had to fulfill it tonight. The portraits turned away as I passed them. By now I had learned to ignore it. I didn't care, or at least that's what I told myself. Suddenly I heard hushed murmurs from the top of Ravenclaw Tower. Minerva. I smiled. If anyone knew how to handle these two fools, it would be her. Then I heard the sound of hurried footsteps descending the stairs and quickly hid behind a statue at the base of the staircase. I silently drew my wand and waited. 3 cat patronuses rushed past me, and I pressed myself deeper into the shadows. When the silvery felines disappeared around the corner, I held my breath and waited for their caster to follow. The footsteps grew louder, and I tightened my grip on my wand. Then Minerva appeared at the top of the stairs. Her face was determined and proud as always, but I could see the subtle signs of worry. The slight furrow of her brows, the way she scanned the corridor ahead with her wand held out. If Potter had been caught, she wouldn't be here. She would be fighting. The fact that there was no sign of the Carrows was a relief. That meant they were out of the way. For now. Minerva knew where Potter was. It was the only explanation. If I hesitated now, I would lose the one person who could tell me what I needed to know. I stepped forward and she stopped dead in her tracks. Her wand snapped toward me. I wonder what could have brought you out of bed at this late hour? She went pale, but she didn't back down even a fraction of an inch. She knew why I was here, and I knew without a doubt she would not tell me anything. I cast a silent legilimens, but she rebuked me with a strength I didn't expect. I raised an eyebrow. Of course she had been expecting this. Of course she thought I was here to stop her, and I couldn't let her know otherwise. I must insist, Minerva. Have you seen Harry Potter? She responded with a spell. I had seen her duel before. She was a formidable witch, and not someone to be underestimated. My wand felt foreign in my hand. The thought of turning it against her chipped away at my heart. But there was no time to dwell on it. She slashed her wand through the air like a blade, fast and aggressive. I barely had time to raise a shield and deflect the attack. She wasn't holding back, and soon sparks ricocheted off the walls. The force of her attacks nearly knocked me off balance a few times. I knew she wouldn't stop, not until she was certain that I was out of the way. I willed my hands to stay steady. This had to look real, but I couldn't hurt her. I wouldn't. She struck again, this time with a torrent of fire. I countered it with a precise flick of my wrist and transformed the flames into thick black smoke. She moved forward, but I had already cast my spell before she had finished hers. The flames directed at me transformed in midair into a massive black serpent, but she hardly paused before dispelling it into a puff of smoke and shards. Moments later, the fragments morphed into daggers aimed straight at me. I was running out of time. She was determined to win, and I had to make her believe she had succeeded. Suddenly, there came voices. Phileas, Pomona, and Horace had arrived, probably called by Minerva's patronesses. Damn it! They joined the fight, and spells flashed through the air like lightning. While I could have easily fought them off one-on-one or even two-on-one, right then I was definitely outnumbered. So I opted for retreat. Minerva conjured a hail of burning embers and sent them flying toward me with deadly precision. I did not counter them. Instead, I let the spell drive me back, forcing myself to stumble. Flitwick shouted something, and the suit of armor beside me lurched to life. It rushed towards me and toppled me. I took my chance. With a final burst of force, I sent the armor flying back toward them. Then I spun and broke into a run. Coward, Minerva called after me when I threw myself through the nearest window. I tried to drown it out, that word that I'd had to swallow on countless occasions like a bitter pill. I could hear them moving behind me, trying to get a clear shot, but I was already gone. The fresh air hit me as I twisted and let the magic pull me into flight. I had done it. Escaped. But I had lost my home. The castle shrank behind me as I flew into the night, heading toward the manor for the next act of this puppet show. As the cool night air whipped past me, my thoughts turned to you. You were blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. If only I could have seen you one last time. Perhaps it would have given me some measure of strength. But there was no time. The battle lines had been drawn. Potter's arrival had set everything in motion, and I couldn't risk my cover. Not when we were so close to the end. I clenched my jaw against the ache of regret. I couldn't afford such sentimental indulgences now. My role was clear, and I had to see it through. The moment my feet touched the ground, the mask of the Dark Lord's right-hand man settled over me like a shroud. The front doors swung open before I could knock. I was greeted by Lucius, who looked even more pale and gaunt than I remembered. He barely met my eyes before stepping aside, and I walked past him without a word. Inside it was quiet. Too quiet. The Dark Lord's presence filled the air like the hum of static before a storm.
Severus.
He stood with his back to me. His posture was rigid, and though I didn't see his face, I could tell he was on edge. My lord. I bowed low, and my gaze flickered to Nagini. She was not at his feet as usual, but instead floating encased in an enchanted sphere. Suddenly Dumbledore's words sounded in my mind.
There will come a time when the Dark Lord will seem to fear for the life of his snake.
This was it. The final piece had fallen into place. I had to tell Potter. Voldemort turned around slowly, and his red eyes seemed to see right into my soul. There was no satisfaction in seeing me return safely. Only cold calculation.
You have news for me.
It was not a question. I inclined my head. It appears Harry Potter has found a way into the castle. The staff have turned against us. I have reason to believe they are preparing for battle as we speak. Voldemort's expression did not change.
And Potter?
I did not see him. Alecto or Amicus must have called the alarm without alerting me first. By the time I made my way there, they must have already been neutralized. Unfortunately, I was intercepted by the other professors. The Dark Lord's eyes flashed dangerously. His gaze shifted briefly toward the enchanted cage where Nagini coiled restlessly. I could tell he was afraid. Not of the battle or even Potter. No, this was a different kind of fear. He was afraid because something was slipping beyond his control. Finally, his attention shifted to the room at large as he announced his plans. I stood off to the side as Death Eaters were dispatched to alert the Dark Lord's allies. The call to battle had come, and we would be departing shortly. Hogwarts would fall before dawn. That was his belief, arrogant as always. In my head, I considered my options. It would be so much more difficult now finding Potter amidst the chaos. But I had to tell him what fate lay in store for him, what must happen in order to defeat Voldemort once and for all. His voice rang out.
Tonight Hogwarts falls. The boy is trapped and his protectors are weak. They will not withstand my power.
Murmured agreement and laughter rippled through the assembled crowd. They were eager for blood. I wondered how many lives would be lost today, and if ultimately it would be worth it. Then came the call for departure, and one after another we apparated away to Hogwarts. The sudden cold hit me like a physical blow as I materialized on the outskirts of Hogsmeade. My breath frosted in the air, and an unnatural chill seeped into my bones. I looked up and my stomach lurched. Dementors. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, circling overhead like a mass of tattered black vultures. The cloying stench of decay and despair emanated from them in waves. Their rasping breaths carried on the wind, a sound that set my teeth on edge and made my skin crawl. I had known they would be here, of course. The Dark Lord had long since won their allegiance, but seeing them now, poised to descend upon the school, upon children, my jaw clenched as nausea roiled in my gut. A howl pierced the night, and I turned to see Greyback and his pack prowling at the edge of the village. Their eyes glowed with feral hunger in the darkness. Some were already transformed into monstrous beasts on 2 legs. Others were mid-change, and their bodies twisted grotesquely as bones cracked and reformed. The sight of it made bile rise in my throat, and then came the tremors as a group of giants lumbered into view, accompanied by a horde of acromantulas. They trudged out of the shadows of the forbidden forest, and the trees snapped like twigs beneath their feet. Crude weapons swung from their meaty fists. I knew the devastation they could wreak with a single blow. How many children would fall beneath those clubs tonight? My chest tightened at the thought of the carnage to come. And then the battle began. The night exploded into chaos as the Dark Lord's forces crashed against Hogwarts' ancient wards. Flashes of light lit up the sky as spell after spell battered the shimmering barrier. I could feel the magic thrumming in the air, crackling with tension as the protective enchantment strained under the onslaught. I wondered if Dumbledore had foreseen an attack of this magnitude. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for my moment. Eventually, a deafening crack split the air and a spiderweb of fissures appeared in the barrier. The wards were failing. Any moment now. With a sound like shattering glass, the protective dome collapsed and dissipated into sparks. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then all hell broke loose. The enemy lines surged forward, and in the chaos I saw my chance. As the others rushed headlong into battle, I slipped away into the castle. I moved through the chaos like a shadow as I scanned the castle for any sign of Potter. Spells flashed and exploded all around me as I wove between dueling figures. The acrid stench of smoke and blood filled my nose as screams and crashes echoed all around me. I forced myself to remain calm and move with strategic focus. A flash of movement caught my eye, and I saw Dolohov cornering a group of terrified students. Without hesitation, I flicked my wand and sent a confundus charm his way. He stumbled, momentarily dazed, which gave the students time to escape. Where was the blasted boy? Surely he wouldn't be cowering in some hidden corner while others fought and died. No, knowing him, he'd be in the thick of it, playing the hero. But he couldn't die. Not before I told him. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. I knew that the longer it took to find him, the more lives would be lost. I gritted my teeth in frustration and moved on. My wand was a constant blur of motion. To any observer, I appeared to be firing indiscriminately, but each spell was carefully aimed and timed to look like a stray shot or ricochet. A stunner deflected to take out Raoul as he cornered an injured fifth year. A blasting curse, ostensibly aimed at a suit of armor but angled to send Yaxley crashing through a window. With each spell cast, a part of me marveled at how good it felt to finally turn my wand against those I had pretended to serve for so long. But I moved on, desperately scanning the battlefield for a flash of messy black hair. Potter had to be here, somewhere. Suddenly I heard my name. I whirled around with my wand raised. It was not an enemy, but Lucius. His eyes showed barely concealed terror. He looked like a man who had just realized he had backed the wrong horse in this blasted war. He pulled me into a secluded corner.
The Dark Lord wants to see you.
His eyes darted around nervously. He clearly didn't want to be here. I bit back a frustrated groan. What could Voldemort want from me now? I'm in the middle of fighting, can't it wait? Lucius cast a glance over his shoulder and lowered his voice.
No, it cannot. He was insistent.
I hesitated. Refusing the summons would raise suspicion as well as put Lucius in the way of the Dark Lord's wrath. I had no choice. Fine, where is he?
The Shrieking Shack.
I took one last look at the battlefield. Potter still wasn't anywhere to be seen. I could only hope that I could catch him afterward. I made my way outside, dodging spells and debris as I headed towards the whumping willow. The familiar knot on the trunk froze the thrashing branches, allowing me to slip into the hidden tunnel beneath. As I crouched and hurried through the dank passageway, my mind raced. Why had the Dark Lord summoned me now in the midst of the battle? What could be so urgent that he'd recall me from the fight? A gnawing dread settled in my stomach. The tunnel seemed longer than I remembered. Potter was still out there somewhere, and time was running out. I needed to find him and pass on the crucial information before it was too late. I emerged into the dilapidated interior of the Shrieking Shack. Dust motes danced in the faint moonlight filtering through boarded-up windows. The Dark Lord stood with his back to me, gazing out a grimy window at the battle raging in the distance. Nagini floated beside him in her magical sphere. The air felt charged with an ominous energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "My lord, you summoned me?" He remained quiet, and I could feel the precious seconds slipping through my fingers. I had to try again. "The castle is in chaos, my lord. Let me try to find Potter and bring him to you. He will not come willingly, but I..."
No.
I took a deep breath and pushed down the unease building in my chest.
Potter is reckless, but he is not a fool. He will not come until there is no other choice.
"My lord, I can bring him here before..."
I said no.
This time his voice was sharp and final.
You are anxious, Severus.
I stilled. "I only wish to serve you, my lord." The elder wand rested lightly in his hand. He lifted it slightly, examining it, as if it were a confusing puzzle.
It is curious, this wand.
I didn't dare to speak. Voldemort turned it over in his hands, studying the dark wood as though he expected it to reveal something to him.
This wand is powerful. The Elder Wand. The Wand of Destiny. The Death Stick.
His voice grew softer, thoughtful.
I have used it, won battles with it, and yet it resists me.
I felt the shift before I fully understood it. A pause, and suddenly the pieces fell into place. This was not about Potter. This was about the wand. He stepped closer, and his voice took on a hard edge.
The Elder One does not serve me properly, Severus. I wonder if you already know why.
My stomach turned to ice when I understood what he was saying. My usefulness had run its course, and I had become a problem to be solved. Voldemort tilted his head slightly as his eyes bore into me.
It is said that the wand chooses the wizard.
I stood motionless, but my mind was screaming in silent terror. I had gravely miscalculated.
You killed Dumbledore. You were the one to defeat him.
I had killed Dumbledore, but the wand had not yielded to me that night. I had not won it. It belonged to Draco Malfoy. A boy who had never even realized what he had done. A boy who had hesitated on that tower, whose hands had shaken too much to finish the task. A boy who had been forced into a war he had never wanted. I could say nothing. Not that anything could have swayed the Dark Lord's mind. If he knew the truth, Draco would be dead before the hour was through. I had given my vow to protect him, so I held my silence. I let him believe it was me. Voldemort stepped closer with the wand leveled at my face. His expression was unreadable, but I could feel it. The decision was made.
My regrets, Severus, but the wand's allegiance must be mine.
A flick of his fingers and Nagini's enchanted cage flickered, then vanished. I barely had time to react. And then there was only pain as those wretched fangs sank into my throat, tearing it to shreds and unleashing their venomous sting. My legs buckled and I staggered, crashing to the ground. The world tilted sickeningly as I fell. Pain exploded through my body, radiating from my ravaged throat in waves of searing agony. I could feel the blood gushing from the wound, hot and sticky as it soaked my robes. My hand flew to my neck instinctively, desperately trying to stem the flow. But it was futile. The blood poured through my fingers in a relentless crimson tide. The venom burned like liquid fire in my veins, each heartbeat pumping it further through my body, but even worse was the numb coldness that chased the burning pain. My limbs grew heavy and unresponsive as the edges of my vision began to darken and blur. Voldemort's pale face swam above me, distorted and nightmarish. His lipless mouth moved, but I couldn't make out the words over the roaring in my ears. Then he was gone, leaving me alone on the filthy floor of the shrieking shack. Alone to die. But I was not alone. A floorboard creaked, then hushed voices, footsteps, and suddenly there he was. Potter. He crouched down next to me. His green eyes were wide with shock and something that looked suspiciously like concern. Granger and Weasley hovered just behind him, equally pale and horrified. For a moment, all I could do was stare. After all this time, all the searching, he had found me. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by a surge of desperate urgency. There was so much he needed to know, so much I had to tell him. But my ravaged throat refused to form words, producing only wet, choking sounds. I couldn't fail now. Not when I was so close. My memories, of course. My last gift. I willed them forward with every ounce of strength I had left. They spilled out in a rush from my eyes, my ears, and my nose, silvery wisps of truth I had guarded for so long. Take them. My vision blurred as I watched Potter fumble for something to collect the memories. Granger's hand shot out to offer him a small glass vial. He snatched it and began to gather the silvery strands clumsily. I could only hope he wouldn't miss any crucial pieces. The pain was nothing but a distant throb, dulled by the spreading numbness. My body felt leaden, and I knew I didn't have much time left. When the last wisp had been safely captured, Potter leaned in close. His face swam in and out of focus, but those eyes, those achingly familiar green eyes, remained sharp and clear. The battle raging outside faded away to nothing. There was only Lily, looking at me through her son's eyes. I wanted to beg for forgiveness for failing to protect him, but I was beyond words now. Forgiveness would have to wait for another life, if there was such a thing. I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. Each breath came more shallow than the last at twice the effort. The world began slipping away as darkness closed in at the edges of my vision. My thoughts turned to you. I would have given anything to have you by my side, to see your face one last time, but I was glad that you were far from this carnage, safe and unaware. My hand flitted weakly over my chest, and my fingers didn't stop until they closed around the small pendant tucked beneath my robes. The twin to yours. I had always thought I would welcome death, but now that it was coming for me, I was afraid, like the coward they had called me. I ran my thumb over the contours of the small engraved serpent. One press of its emerald eye would call you to my side in an instant. For a terrible moment I was tempted to have you here as I slowly faded into nothing. But no, I couldn't be that selfish. You deserved better than to watch me die in this wretched place. So I simply held onto it tightly as memories of you washed over me and stemmed the growing panic. I tried to make them last, to stretch out these final seconds into an eternity where I could lose myself in thoughts of you. I was so cold. My hand went slack, and then there was no real feeling at first. Just a dull sensation like being caught between sleep and waking. A strange weightlessness as if I were hovering just outside of my own body. But then a sharp pain dragged me violently back into my battered body. It exploded through me and I gasped, or tried to. My lungs refused to obey and my throat felt like I had swallowed glass. I struggled to open my eyes, fighting against the weight of my own eyelids. Was this death? Had I landed in some twisted version of hell, condemned to relive my final agonizing moments for eternity? The pain certainly felt real enough. Every nerve ending screamed in protest when I tried to move. My fingers twitched and I forced them to reach up, expecting to find the ragged, gaping wound Nagini had left. Instead, I felt something wrapped tightly around my neck. Confusion pierced through the fog of pain. Dead men didn't need bandages. With monumental effort, I pried open my eyes. The world shifted into focus and blurred shapes resolved into unfamiliar surroundings. Slanted wooden beams crisscrossed above me with cobwebs hanging in their dusty corners. Weak sunlight filtered in through a tiny window and cast long afternoon shadows across weathered floorboards. I was in a bed in an attic of some sort, clearly uninhabited judging by the layers of dust coating every surface. I tried to make sense of it all. I was alive, but this wasn't the shrieking shack. It wasn't St. Mungo's either, and it certainly wasn't any afterlife I'd ever imagined. Where in Merlin's name was I? I tried to piece together how I had ended up here, but my mind felt like it was stuffed with cotton wool. Fragmented memories flashed through my head, Potter's face swimming above me, Nagini striking at my neck again and again, Voldemort's cold voice pronouncing my death sentence. But how had I survived? Who had brought me here? And where exactly was here? The questions swirled in my mind. I needed answers and understand what had happened. I gritted my teeth and forced my aching body to move. Every muscle protested as I struggled to push myself upright. The room tilted and spun alarmingly, but I refused to give in to the weakness. I had survived worse. I would not be defeated by my own frailty now. Inch by excruciating inch, I levered myself into a sitting position. My head throbbed in time with my racing pulse and nausea washed over me. But I ignored it all. I had to get up and figure out where I was and what had happened. The fate of the wizarding world might depend on it. I braced myself against the wall and attempted to stand. My legs trembled, threatening to give way at any moment. For a heartbeat, I thought I might actually manage it. Then the world lurched violently and my knees buckled like brittle twigs. I crashed to the floor in an ungainly heap, and my weak arms did little to brace the impact. For a moment, all I could do was lie there, gasping for breath as the room spun dizzyingly around me. Then I felt it. A warm wetness spreading across my neck and chest. With shaky fingers, I reached up to the bandages. They were soaked through. When I pulled my hand away, it came back crimson, covered in blood. My blood. I stared at my stained fingers, strangely mesmerized by the vivid red. It seemed impossible that I had any blood left to lose. Yet here it was, seeping steadily from the wound I had so foolishly reopened with my ill-advised attempt to stand. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my chest, but emerged as little more than a choking gurgle. How fitting. I had survived Nagini's attack only to bleed out on this grimy floor because I was too stubborn and impatient to stay put. There came the sound of pounding footsteps, and a surge of adrenaline flooded through me despite my rapidly fading strength. Someone was coming. Friend or foe, I had no way of knowing, and in my current state I was in no condition to defend myself against anyone. I tried to push myself up and face whatever was coming with as much dignity as I could muster, but my arms shook uncontrollably and refused to support my weight. A door flew open with a bang that seemed to rattle my very bones. And then there you were. For a moment, I thought I must truly be dying, that my oxygen-starved brain had conjured up this final, comforting hallucination. But no. You were undeniably real. My foggy mind screamed that you shouldn't be here. You should be far away from me. I tried to speak and warn you, but all that accomplished was more choking. Blood bubbled on my lips, warm and coppery. You rushed to my side, but my mind had already become sluggish again, and I sank back into the darkness.